I think bandwidth problems everywhere.
Okay, we might, if you heard the aircraft sound above, it's because we are on the flight path to HL Airport. This may happen a couple of times, in which case we'll just pause for a few seconds.
Yeah.
Oh, very ominously, these have increased in the last 1 month, whatever that means. They're all fighter jet aircraft. All right.
Oh.
Flying overhead. We really don't know what it means.
Okay, so we will start now. Huh?
Good idea. Have you got in?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, good morning all, and thank you for joining us. I am Jyotsna Jha. I work as Director of Center for Budget and Policy Studies, and we are very happy to have this program today, Educational Ideals Through the Theatre. And we are very happy to have Professor Padaki, and we are organizing this in memory of Dr. Poornima Vyasulu, who was one of our founder members. And as many of you would know, that she had a multifaceted personality, and theatre was one of the things that she was passionate about and engaged with. And Professor Vijay Padaki played an important role in her engagement with theatre. So we are very happy to host this program. Every year we used to do a memorial lecture, and this year, for obvious reasons, we could not do it. And therefore, we really think that, at times it's a blessing in disguise, and this may turn out to be far more enriching experience for all you know. So without taking much time, I will invite Professor Padaki. Professor Padaki is a known name in the world of theatre, and also I think in Bangalore. So Professor Padaki wears several hats. He has been teaching management. He has been a management professional, and his interests are in organization and institutional development. But he has also been equally deeply engaged with theatre. He is very well known as a playwright, but I think he's also as well known for his experiments using theatre for various other purposes, including in education. And without again going for long about his introduction, I will actually invite him, and he will make a presentation first for about, say, 20 minutes. And then we will have a conversation between him and me. And then we will move on from there. We have hour and a half, and therefore feel free to put your questions as you go along. You can put your questions in the chat box, and my colleagues are actually looking at that, and they will try to put it together, put similar questions together, and we will try to actually have a good, enriching, engaging conversation on this whole issue of theatre in education. So a very warm welcome to you, Professor Padaki, and it's all yours now.
Thank you, Jyotsna. A quick check. I hope it's audible. Everyone can hear me. All right. It's a pleasure being here to take part in the annual Poornima Vyasulu Memorial. What I propose to do is to use a set of slides to share the main ideas for the morning with you. So in a few moments, I'll be going off the screen and I'll be sharing the slides with you, and I'll talk through the slides. And then I'll get back to the conversation. So you've seen my face, now you'll see the slides. Right. I'm not getting the first slide.
Escape, I think. Escape. Stop share.
Give me just half a minute. Here we are. It's a picture I borrowed from CBPS. For some reason. Okay, right. So, what can one say about Poornima? She was first a friend, then a student, and then a family friend. She became a student again during her doctoral research, not a formal student, but in a very informal way. I continued to be a sounding board for her research, especially in the meta-analysis. And she almost became a colleague in Ahmedabad. When I was there for my second assignment, there was a possibility of her joining us. But then that young lady sitting there in the audience, Shivangi, she decided to come into this world, and so Poornima couldn't accept the offer, and she went back home. But finally, she was a colleague in the theater, and that's Bangalore Little Theater. So I've known Poornima, I had known Poornima in many different avatars. And of course, it's wonderful that CBPS has found a way to remember her once a year and through this memorial event. This is the title of the talk, but I think it's useful for me to explain what it's about and what it's not. It is not a research article. It's not an academic treatise. I would much rather spend the available time in sharing some experiences in taking theater methodology into schools in the tough conditions of this country. The context is as important as the content in the subject. And it's significant that we should be talking about this today because the month of September marks 60 years of Bangalore Little Theatre. And it's the Diamond Jubilee year, by the way, starting now. And in these 60 years, we've done a lot of work in children's theatre. It began as early as the 60s. Our foray into children's theatre was in the 60s. And in this Diamond Jubilee year, we are bringing out a series of publications of plays. There are going to be 9 to 10 volumes of plays. The first 3 have already come out. And it's important that 1/3 of these 3 volumes are devoted to children's theatre. The third of the 3 volumes is actually about plays in education, expected at the end of the year. Right, we'll move on. This is the sort of coverage that's possible. It's the scope of work in taking theater into education that we've been engaged in for many years now. But this is easily a 2-hour seminar, and it's impossible today. We've got to do something in 20 minutes. So I propose that I stick to our project experiences and not the theoretical side of theater in education. This is what I propose to do. Get down to actual experiences and let's see what sorts of questions they trigger in your minds. Because of the education team in VLT at the moment, they're all present in the seminar, and they're really the people who are in the schools all the time, I just sit at the desk and bask in the glory of their work. But they're the ones who are there doing all the work, and you'll hear more about their work as I proceed. A good place to begin. Now we are into the actual presentation. A good place to begin is to remember Rabindranath Tagore. We tend to forget that he was one of our greatest early educationists. And his advice to teachers, parents, the community, and society was this. In other words, there's a nature-given facility that we tend to forget or ignore, or worse, destroy. More often than not, the process of education destroys the nature-given facility of imagination. And it is the purpose of education, in fact, child rearing in the broader sense, to constantly nurture this facility. And the rest will take care of itself. In our work, in training, for instance, we have worked with a very wide range of ages. And it's amazing how the little children, when they come into our workshops, how quickly they regain that ability to imagine. And they often amaze us with the kinds of things they do on the floor. But as you get older, it gets rusty. College-going kids take several hours to be able to get back to enjoying imagination. And with grown-ups, it's even worse. All right. Why theater in schools? Now, there's a lot of work on well-researched work on what theater actually does in education. There are cross-sectional studies, there are longitudinal studies. If you do a meta-analysis of these studies, you can zero in on 3 to 4 important phenomena. And this is presented here. You see these effects in more or less all the studies. You don't see them in the control groups. You see these in the groups that have been exposed to theater activity in a professional way, in a well-planned way, again and again and again. And we've certainly seen this in a lot of our work. This is the justification. Now the question arises, how does theater activity do this? Why doesn't the teaching of physics or chemistry or maths do this? How is it that the theater does it? It's very simple. The teaching of all subjects is cognitive learning, but the teaching of theater is experiential learning. You do things first. You don't listen to why it should be done. It's not knowledge accumulation, it's experience accumulation. And this makes the big difference. About 80 to 85% of theater curriculum is experiential. Another theoretical basis for this, and if there's interest, we can revert to it later on. I want to go on. If we wish to do theater in schools in India, we need a valid curriculum. We need reliable pedagogy. You need trained teachers and trainers. Where are they? They don't exist. Some years ago, the CBSE board invited us to comment on a draft syllabus that put together for theater as a curriculum subject. Classes in 10 to 12. excellent syllabus. There's no doubt that the syllabus was very well thought out. But I asked them the question, who's going to teach this? There was no answer. Teacher training doesn't prepare them for the rather specialized set of skills to teach theater. It's more facilitating theater rather than teach theater. So the practical thing to do is to get in there and in the process of doing things, sort of generate the needed, climate and circumstances for more rigorous theatre activity in school. So this is what we do in a very, very practical way. Try and get into schools first and adopt two broad streams. Introduce high quality theatre activity as a valued pursuit. In other words, they must give timetable time for this. It's not once a year on Parents' Day. It's something that's happening. And separately, introduce theatre education for classroom practice. I'm going to, in a little while, explain what is meant by theatre education. This is what we're trying to do. On terminology, we use the term theatre and education for the rather specialized pursuit of the application of theatre methodology to enhance the learning process of the classroom. Use theatre methodology, especially the experiential method, to teach curriculum subjects. This is the way the term theatre and education is used, should be used. And I've chosen a few examples and illustrations to share with you today. But our entry into this wonderful, exciting world of TIE came from one major project in our association with Wipro. Wipro has a major investment in promoting sustainability through school projects. And it's called the Earth-In program. And they invited us to be the process facilitators. We couldn't say no. I mean, it was the best thing that could happen to us in our education program. But then we did the research, and that was a bit interesting. We found that while TIE as a concept and methodology particularly is well developed in many parts of the world, it is very poorly developed and very poorly appreciated in many developing countries. We're too preoccupied with economic development. The methodology for TIE for some subjects was pretty well developed even in the West, but very poorly developed in environment and sustainability. To teach environment and sustainability, TIE was practically non-existent. This was great scope for pioneering work in India, and we plunged in. So what we did really was to do an applied research project, which can be called a methodology lab. We were given two schools. We could work with the teachers and students together in the classroom. They had given us hours per week to try out take what's available as methodology in the best centers in the world and apply it to the teaching of environment and sustainability. And this is what we did. One whole year. Now, a little demystification would be in order. There's a general misunderstanding that theatre and education means enacting something. It's not so. methodology has both performances and non-performance metrics. Yes, there is performance, and performances are of three types: performances by students, performances with students, performances for students. But what you perform has a lot of research going into it. You do some hard data gathering and case study like work, and that forms the scripting. On the other side, you have the non-performance metrics. And this is as important, and in fact, much more in volume in the literature. And this is not easily recognized. So the work resulted in a major handbook for teacher training. Uh, it's a pretty comprehensive handbook, which is ready for use in teacher training. That's what it looks like. It has those 4 parts. And we are now at the stage where dissemination is the next big thing to do. So now in the remaining time, what I'd like to do is to give you some examples of how TIA has been actually used in our work. The first example is of a performance. We took a Czech classic, which is a science fiction written in the 20s on the production of robots to help humankind. It was a pure science fiction. In fact, incidentally, the word robot came into the English language from the Czech robota, which meant bonded labor. So we redid this play and set it in the year 2024, but now with hard data based on the series of the Living Planet reports on the depletion of natural resources on Earth. And it's no more a science fiction. It's what mankind has created for itself. So this is an example of how the whole play was devised by a series of workshop interactions with students, along with teachers, and it was finally performed to very large numbers. When we first took it on, many teachers in the school were skeptical. This will go over their heads. This is not going to work. This is too heavy. But we had faith in Tagore, who said, we underestimate the child's capacity for comprehension. And 600, 700 students sitting in the Tata Auditorium in ISC or Chowda, they were lapping it up. It made so much sense to them. Now, the next example would be the use of a technique, and we're particularly happy with this one because it was developed originally in PLT. Many of us would remember the story of King Solomon's judgment when 2 women were quarreling over the ownership of a baby, and the idea of the chalk circle came out of that. And this has been hundreds of times in many cultures. In fact, this story exists in Chinese folk tales. It appears in Vikramaditya. It's in many cultures. We give it a slightly different slant. We use this for actually as a TIE exercise. So we'd have a chalk circle. We'd ask for volunteers. One volunteer would be in the center in the circle as a baby. Then you have 2 volunteers as mothers picking up the hands and pulling. And when it's neither going left or right, the 2 volunteers ask for more help. And the baby is being pulled very tight. And then two others come and pick up the legs. And the baby is now being really pulled apart. And at some point, we stop the exercise. And we get a reflection series of a reflection going, and a series of thoughts come out of it. First of all, they realize that the baby is a metaphor. It is an issue. which leads us to the second insight. The idea of stakeholding. And that in an issue, there are two or more stakeholders. These are concepts you go to management school to learn, but it's amazing how quickly children pick it up. How quickly they pick it up. The third idea is even more interesting, that you have what in management literature we call a field force analysis. You can analyze, you can chart the forces at work at the field. Then we developed a French play on the subject of global warming.
Yes, it seems he has, I think he's back. So just be there, and he should be back in a minute. So just be there, all of you. So I just request you to wait for a minute, and he should be back. Hello, Professor Padaki, we can't hear you. And we can't see you. I'm sending. Professor Padaki, can you hear me?
Speaker.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh,
Yes,
that's
we
good.
can hear you.
Yeah,
So
we
that's
cannot
good,
yet
that's
see
good.
you, but we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So I'll get back to the screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Shall I continue?
Yeah, please.
So I'm going to speed it up now.
Yeah, please.
So this
No, we can't
was,
see it.
it looked like the screen is now not working.
Yes, your screen is not there, and
Can we log off and log on again?
You can hear me, but you can't see my screen, right?
yes.
Okay, shall we do something which is I leave the meeting and rejoin?
Okay, or if you want, okay, you could try that, or we could share your presentation from our side, if that helps.
No, you need to see the screen. That's what I meant. So what I'm going to do is, this will take less time. Let me just leave the meeting and I'll rejoin, and I'll use the same panelist connection.
Yeah, please do that. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
And meanwhile, I request all of you to just continue here. Don't leave. And if already you have, I see a few questions here, but if you have more, please add. And I think it will not take more than 2 minutes, and he should be back in 2 minutes time. So just hold on there. And yeah. In fact, it is taking a number of questions actually has come to my mind listening to him. So I'm now waiting for him to finish so that I can ask those questions. So please add yours as well. Yeah, so I can see that he has rejoined, but I'm still not able to hear. Professor Padaki, are you there? Can you hear me? Professor Padaki? Professor Padaki, can you hear me? Because I cannot hear you.
Hi, sir. I'm Monica here from CBPS. Okay, sir. Okay. Okay, sir. So we can.
Since Professor Padaki is taking some time to log in and sort out the issue from his side of sharing the screen, and also actually we cannot hear him. We are with him on the phone, and so he will come back. Meanwhile, let me actually have a brief conversation with Dr. Usha Reddy, who is with us here. Uh, mm, Dr. Usha Reddy happens to be Professor Dr. Vyasulu's, like Poornima's sister-in-law. I mean, she is a known communication and development expert. And I will say it's a small world. It's odd that, you know, I had met her decades ago, and now we are together again. And we are discussing someone who has been extremely close to Dr. Usha Reddy. And in a strange way, although I didn't know her personally very well, I had met her only once or twice, but over the last 10 years, she has become close to me also. You know, being part of this institution has done that to me. So Usha, very happy to have you here, and we'll be happy if you share some thoughts with us meanwhile.
Thank you, Jyotsana. It's been a long time. It has been on my mind that I should speak both of my relationship with Poornima, which goes beyond just the family one, and also about some of the things that Vijay has been talking about as theatre. Poornima, of course, I met as a very young 21-year-old girl, just soon after she had married my brother. Fresh, lively, intelligent, and wondering what to do with her life. We would talk about a lot of things, but at that time we were mostly focused on getting to know each other. Soon after, of course, she went on to do a PhD to prove to all of us that she was better than us, which I'm glad that she did. Which I'm glad that she did. But I will say this much, because I see Shivi and Vinod here. I will say this much, that for the household, she was a pivot. She was what everything revolved around. And she brought a lot of balance, and the word is not humanity, but a lot of balance and a lot of home to the house in which they lived for all of us. We talk about many things. And in later years, when she would visit me when I was in Delhi or here, we would, of course, talk about things other than family. We would talk about the kind of work that she was doing, kind of work that I was doing, whether it made any sense at all, and whether there were areas of congruence. And yes, there were areas of congruence. So we'd talk about her projects and the way that they would go. Having said that, I mean, I saw her also in her later years while she tried to maintain this kind of a balance between home and work, despite her progressive illness. And, you know, so it is a tremendous loss to all of us. Her loss is a tremendous loss. And so many years later, I still feel it. I see her in her daughters, in their mannerism. I see her very much there, which is as it should be. And I do miss her. And I've been traveling all these years on and off, which is why I have not been able to participate. So I told Vinod that in May I wanted to come, but I was COVIDified. So I couldn't, like all of us. So that's about Poornima. But I just like to make a mention, and I may put it for even Vijay to answer. I'm a communicator, basically. I use communication skills to advocate change, behavioral change, and development. And for me, communication is more than the tool. And for me, then theater becomes a tool, whether we use it for education or whether we use it for behavioral change. And 2 years ago, when I was teaching at the University of Hyderabad, I chose to teach the foundational course in communication theory. And when I started talking about the tools of communication as being not just one-to-one, but but theater as a form, or folk theater as a form of communication. The students sort of looked at me and said, "Ma'am, why are you telling us all of this? You should be telling us about the internet and social media." That is where it is. It was necessary to point out to them repeatedly during the course of the semester that the fundamentals remain the same. The fundamentals just like the fundamentals of a building remain the same as the plan, the foundation, the materials you use. That the fundamentals of the process remain the same, whether you're using theater or whether you're using social media, or whether you're using radio or television. Yes, that the grammar of each medium changes, so the way in which we use the medium is going to change because the grammar changes. Obviously, what applies in a live theater will not apply in a movie. Obviously, as a face-to-face interaction we might have had does not have the same experience as what we're doing today. The grammar is different. And I think to address the millennials and to address this generation, we're going to have to find a way of getting those fundamentals across into a new reality, into a new experience that they have, where to all of them, we are ancient monuments. So I see Vijay is back on the screen. So it'd be nice to also, if he would address this. And so by saying that,
I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you're audible too. So yeah, so theater in education, just like technology in education, needs to have a very strong pedagogy of how we apply it, and more especially of how we don't apply it. So I hope you're going to address that too. And thank you, Jyotsna, for the few minutes.
Thank you, Usha. And just to add a little, that Poornima seemed to have brought that home and care in our office as well. So we have talked about it actually over the years. So thanks a lot. And so we'll go back to Professor Vijay Padaki. And can I request you to then take, say, 5 more minutes and wrap it up so that then we can have a conversation? And there are already some very good questions, so we can then take it forward there. He's gone again.
I don't see him. Where is
Yeah.
he? He was here a minute ago.
Yeah. Oh, God.
These are also the kind of things one has to address when we try to
Yes.
use technology,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
yes.
we think it's all very beautiful,
much.
but it is
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
yeah, in every manner, I mean, so this morning, for example, I got delayed because I could not connect. My daughter, who is a 10-year-old, she just could not connect for her school class. And since she was very anxious, I tried everything and it just didn't happen. We tried everything possible, including, talking to the teacher. So yes, so this is part of that. And there is something deeper in that how do you, does it also take away the human element? The whole issue
Yes,
of
it takes it away.
what can be digitized and what cannot be. So that a touch cannot be digitized, smell cannot be digitized. So there are, I think, deeper philosophical issues also when we interact, both in the world of theater and outside the world of theater.
Yeah.
Very much.
I just wanted to say something.
Yeah,
And
please,
I
Shivani.
think a situation like this, given the way mom handled things, when there are technical issues and things aren't going the way that they should, right now she would have said, "You can't see my screen, but I'm going to tell you what's on my screen. And you can imagine my screen." And she would have described it in complete detail. And she would have improvised in the situation completely. And while theater and education, as you're talking about it, in the curriculum is one thing, she used theater in educating me at home all the time. Every time I got into trouble, she would say, you be me and I'll be you, and you tell me what you did wrong. So theater in education was all the time for me.
Thanks,
And
Shivangi. That's nice.
that sort of a thing.
I'm hoping I'm audible now.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Audible and visible.
Audible and visible. So you give me a signal when I can resume.
Yeah, please resume. And I would say that
We've lost precious time, but I have
I've
just
lost. So if you wrap it up, then we can go to the
I
questions.
just have a couple of points to do.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm almost at the end.
Yeah,
All
please
right.
go ahead, sir. Please.
Sorry. Oh yeah, I got to press that first.
You want to go to the slide?
Then I can. Oh, you want to get it towards the end. Right, isn't this where we were? So this is something we developed in-house. It's on the subject of global warming. What happens in this play is that the northern hemisphere has destroyed itself. And there's a nuclear holocaust which destroyed itself. There are a couple of survivors. They run and run and run and find a new place to start a new life, and they reach the Antarctica. And to their horror, they've discovered that the ocean levels are rising and the glacier they've landed on is shrinking. And they're trying to understand this. So this is the basis for the play. It's wacky, it's great fun. And it's constantly engaging the audience. And it's very, very mobile. It can be taken to any place, performed in gardens, performed in libraries, performed in all kinds of space. In schools, it ends with the two survivors getting a group of 6 students onto the glacier, getting them to sit down and ponder over why this is happening. And then there's a structured exercise. There's a set of 4 questions that they have to work on, sitting in groups of 6 and 8, on why this is happening. What is it that we've done to make this happen? And what is it that we know but are not willing to see? So this is what it's all about. And these are wrap up by looking at our strategy in taking theater to schools in the educational setting. First of all, we want to move away from the trainer consultant role. It's all there. I probably don't have to talk about it. We are working very hard on long-term partnerships and networks. And of course, we have a special emphasis in our program by policy to reach the underprivileged communities and schooling systems. We're working towards creating a network of about 6 schools who will collaborate and work closely together in this area of work. What are our future challenges? Basically, 3 directions. Dissemination of the TIE methodology and especially the handbook, which means bringing this out in regional languages and creating effective teacher training modules we can't be taking it to all the schools. It has to be through teacher training, scaling up, and advocacy. Well, that's it. I think if we had, if it wasn't for the interruption, this would be neatly within 20 minutes. I'm sorry about the disruption. I'm pretty sure the Indian Air Force doesn't have anything to do with it. So I'd like to end with one of my favorite visual images of a truly liberated child. All right. We're ready for the conversation. We're ready for Q&A after that. And I hope the last part was audible.
Yes, it was.
All right, great.
Yes, it
So
was.
I'm going to stop the screen share now and give you the
Yes. So thank you, Professor Padaki, for the wonderful presentation and the disruption. I mean, that's what we were talking about. That's technology for us. So I'll move to questions. I have a few questions of my own, and then I will move to questions that have come from the floor. So first of all, we'd like to know, how do you see this, your own Bangalore Little Theatre's theatre in education in the larger perspective, for instance, the TI movement in Europe, in UK in particular, but also other parts of Europe and in other parts of India?
This is partly a question of strategy, partly a question of policy. I think the starting point is to accept that we don't have in India what can be called a social investment in the theatre. And I think this is difficult to swallow, it's difficult to accept. Just because I indulge in theatre, it doesn't mean that the Indian society has a social investment in theatre. So when the Little Theatre movement started in England, this was way back in the mid 50s and late 50s. It was society reconstructing the theatre institution, not performance. The theatre institution has multiple facets and multiple stakeholders all collaborating. There are writers, there are designers, there are musicians, there are carpenters, all of these people constitute the institution of the theatre, not just the actor. All right? And professional artists decided to give their time to rejuvenate the theatre in communities. And that's how community theatre came up. That was the Little Theatre movement. And we had a marvelous British couple landing in Bangalore and helping us create the Bangalore Little Theatre. The gentleman was a trained director, his wife was a trained actress, and they brought the tradition of the Little Theatre here. And from the beginning, we've been maintaining that community theatre philosophy, which means reaching out to the community. So we have a long, long way to go to get the social investment in the theatre, to respect theatre as something that we all ought to be doing, especially in education. And that takes us back to our strategy. Take the long haul, it's an uphill road. Start work in schools, get them to appreciate the quality of a good product, the value of a good product, and then only preach about theatre education.
That takes
That's the position, that's the line we've taken.
So that actually takes me to my next question, that what do you find more challenging, or maybe actually, I don't know, but what do you find more challenging when working with schools or teachers? High quality theatre activity or theatre as a pedagogy in the classroom? What is more challenging, especially in our context, Indian context, when it's not part of a social movement or social consciousness?
Well, again, speaking in a very pragmatic, if you have to take a pragmatic approach, you have to do good quality theater first to appreciate its value, and then use that as the gateway to say, okay, let's talk pedagogy. We can't begin with pedagogy, it never works. You know, I mean, let me give you an example. I mean, this has happened so many times. We go to a school, we meet the principal, if you're lucky, we meet the board, the management folks of the school. And one of the questions we asked the group is, why do you teach physics? Silence. Why do you teach history? If you have a class of 30 kids, are you intending to turn out 30 physicists? Of course not. Then why do you teach physics? Then somebody picks up the courage to say, oh, we teach physics because it's in the syllabus. But they've never thought about why. And then they arrive at this, sometimes for the first time in their lives, these are experienced teachers. For the first time, they're saying, we teach physics because it's good in itself. We teach history because it's good in itself. It does something to the child which is unseen. So we said, why not theater?
Okay, since you mentioned physics, I will actually move away from my question and bring a question of from a physicist here, a link to physics, and then come back to that. So this is a question from Sharat Anantmurthy. He asks, what are your views on the enactment of abstract concepts, attaining equilibrium in thermodynamics, how collisions play a role in physics, etc., even quantum mechanics that is supposed to be only abstract and worth fewer pictorial representations?
I have to admit that I didn't grasp the question.
Okay.
If you, maybe it's...
Okay, I'll elaborate it a bit. So theoretical, I mean, I'm again, he had two things articulated differently, so I'll just read it out, otherwise we'll leave it. So theatrical events related to science are often concerning themes where science is interacting with other areas, such as science and politics or sociological issues in science. What are your views on enactment of abstract concepts, such as attaining equilibrium in thermodynamics, how collisions play a role in physics, or even in, say, quantum mechanics, that is supposed to be only abstract and worth fewer pictorial representations?
Okay. I think I've got it. I'll try to address this question, again, not from great theory, but from our experience in working in schools. But there is theory underlying. And once again, it goes back to a very solid principle that Tagore adopted in his educational philosophy. The child is capable of far higher levels of comprehension that we care to imagine. All right? In our own country, there was a series of marvelous experiments in the city of Ahmedabad, which actually led to the creation of the community science center. They took pre-primary kids to see how they could grasp concepts of science without teaching science. They have not yet gone to school to learn lesson 1, lesson 2 about heat, about light, about this, that, and that. It's just exploring materials in nature. Let me give you a couple of examples. A child discovers by doing that the center of the flame in a candle is not as hot as the outside of the flame. The child discovers that a black stone lying in the sun is hotter than a white piece of marble lying in the sun. Now, this sets off a series of curiosity cycles. And they're arriving at very abstract ideas as the difference between heat and temperature. You know, they're very abstract ideas. But for the child, the knowledge of the world is not compartmentalized into physics, chemistry,
Yeah.
this, that.
So,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. So I'll just,
Abstraction comes easily for kids if only we allow it.
yeah. I'll just add another question that came from Mr. Jagdish and is linked to that. What about higher education? So children, yes, you know, young children, concepts that need abstraction, you use theater or say solid materials. What about higher education? What's the role that you see for theater in higher education? That's his question, and it could be in any. I mean, it could be linked to science, or for that matter, any other subject.
In general, when we talk about theater in education, we're not referring to that age group. We're talking about school-going ages.
Yeah.
But even within that, we recognize at least 3 levels of activity, which we can call theater in education. At the youngest age group, you're not even calling it theater. You're just promoting creative expression. You don't call it theater. And it's a lovely, beautiful, chaotic combination of sounds and speech and movement and color and so on. It's not theater, but it's the foundation for theater. You know, we talked about imagination, imagination, imagination. It's only the second stage, which is roughly what you'd call middle school, that you bring in method, how to use your body, how to use your voice, how to use space, and so on. You're still not making theater artists out of them. You're just getting them to appreciate the discipline that goes into a great performance. It's only at high school level that you bring in the academics, Asian theater, Greek theater, the difference in, you know, form and genre and all of that.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is the
Okay. So that again, so takes me to next question of my own, which also actually came from the floor, which was, have you also tried to work with public school teachers, say government schools? And if
I'm losing
yes,
you again.
what was your experience? And if no, can you hear me? Did you hear me? Or should I repeat?
You're losing again. Okay, it's breaking up again. Can you
Okay.
hear me? Your voice is breaking up.
Okay, I will stop my video and repeat
Now
my
it's better.
question.
Now it's better.
Yeah. So, have you tried to work with public school teachers, say government school teachers? If yes, what has been your experience? And if no, do you see any potential? This question I had in my list, it also came from Lakshmi Krishnamurthy, a similar question.
Yeah. I think we'll make a distinction between public school, which means government schools, schools run by a corporation, or this is one kind of public school, and schools that reach very poor children, the disadvantaged children, the underprivileged communities. What they have in common is poor resources, very difficult circumstances back home, and so on. We have chosen to give emphasis to working with the disadvantaged and the less privileged. It doesn't matter what type of school. The answer to your question is that yes, we have worked in government schools, public schools, but not directly, but through another organization or through another agency. For instance, Teach for India has associated us to work in government schools. Gone there on our own. We have struck relationships with non-government schools, but completely devoted to poor kids and poor families. Our experience has been very good. Nature has not made any distinction between these kids and the rich kids in their ability to be creative. And we are very happy with this experience.
Okay.
Now, the emphasis, of course, is to work with teachers. Everything depends on teacher facilitator skills.
Okay. So here I would bring in some of our own experiences. And so we are neither, we are not trained theater people, nor are we trained teachers. I mean, I'm talking of, say, myself, but we do engage with education as researcher. And currently, in fact, CBPS, we are doing a project where we have mentors who are going to classrooms. And we are going to government schools. We are working with 10 government schools in Bihar. And some of the pedagogical activities that we do does involve theater in terms of, role plays and certain imagination, enactment. So those kinds of elements are there. And earlier also, when I worked with, again, it was disadvantaged kids, but outside government system. So have tried to work on issues, for example, issues of gender, issues of ecology, issues of social distancing in a different manner, not the COVID manner, using theater and using, I'll say, more of role play, imagination, and those kinds. Where do you place that? Do you see that, can that be classified under theater in education?
Okay. I will take one step back and then take 2 steps forward. I've been using the word methodology. The word is used with some care. It's not just a fashion of using the word methodology. Methodology really means that you need a strong theoretical base, which gives you principles. The principles give you tools and techniques. And then you would finally need the operating skills to use those tools and techniques. It's a very rigorous definition of methodology, but the starting point is great theory. So when we say we have a repertoire of methods in this methodology, we can put them into conceptual categories as, let's say, columns. And in the rows, we can put this exercise 1, exercise 2, exercise 3, exercise 150, exercise 200. The specific exercises tap or reinforce certain conceptual skills. So those skill sets would be, for instance, imagination itself is a skill set. Interpersonal skills as a skill set. All right?
Yep.
Now, more and more, we are looking at diversity, sensitivity as a skill set, which we didn't 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yes.
So you can conceive skill sets, and then you can look at exercises that tap those skill sets or reinforce those skill sets.
Yeah. So it's the most.
In fact, that's the starting point for a trainer training. You get people to visualize this totality. Does this help?
Yeah. And just a comment that in my experience of working with both large number of public school teachers as well as outside, I think what becomes important and challenging with public schools is that there's a kind of, they are part of a large system, and the rigidity that sets in with being part of the system in terms of expectations, behavior patterns, that makes it much more difficult for them to transcend that, to integrate other kinds of pedagogies that they have not been exposed to already. So with that, I'll move to first a comment and then a question. So Lakshmi Krishnamurthy actually says, being involved in a theater, which is about one's own experience, is what is very different for behavior change than acting in a play. It touches one deeply. So she's just expressing it. And then we have a question from Sridhar Prasad. And he says, in the new normal, and that brings us to the pandemic. And I also wanted to actually ask you a question on that. So in the new normal, how do you see TIE or theater reinvent itself to ensure that the experiential or the live portion, which is very crucial to TIE, is not compromised? So, how do you ensure that live or experiential is not compromised? How do you see the evolution of theater, or can it evolve?
Tough question, Josna. But I picked up two keywords in your comment and question combined. And I'll address these two because they're really two sides of the same coin. One key question is rigidity in the school system. We've learned over the years that it doesn't help to get angry with the school system. It doesn't help. When you sit down and talk to a teacher on a one-on-one basis, even if you talk to a principal on a one-on-one basis, she's sensitive to what education really is. She's not dumb. She's not thick-skinned, but she's part of a system in which she's playing her role of catering to the system, which is the mark system, the grade system, the competitive system, etc., which includes parents, which includes the neighborhood. So we've come to look at this a little more sympathetically and not get angry about it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But she's one little bit in that larger system.
Very much, yeah.
So what do? Now we fall back on a very important behavioral science principle. If you want to bring change in a person or a group of person, the change has to be composite in three parts of the way the brain works. You have to bring change in cognition, thinking, knowledge. You have to bring change in affect, which is the feeling states. And you have to bring change in the willed behavior. Now, practically everything we do begins with trying to change thinking. We put information in there. We preach, we lecture, we show a great PowerPoint. Okay, so we believe that if you change thinking, it'll lead to change in feeling, it'll lead to change in behavior. This is the basis for a lot of models. KAP is based on this model, knowledge, attitude, practice.
Yeah.
In marketing and communication, AIDA is based on this model. Attention, interest, all right? Desire, action. But the scientific fact is this is weak. A majority of mankind's effort follows this in child rearing, in training, in education, etc., it's in therapy, etc. If you take the opposite, don't talk. Do something to generate new behaviors first. Let people experience that behavior and think about it. Then change is easier. So when you get into a school, stop preaching. Let's do an exercise. Do things first, and if you now structure that activity carefully, it's actually social engineering, but with the best of scientific inputs in it, that leads to opening up the mind to receive new information.
Sure.
This is what we would recommend.
Yeah. So would you like to address this question of how do you, ensure that experience or the life is not compromised in the new normal when you use technology for that matter?
Well, What did you have in mind when you said new normal?
No, this question that I read earlier, that something that's very central to theatre is experience and the live portion. So when we talk of new normal, say for example, using technology as a means, how do you ensure that element is not compromised? That live element, that experiential element, how do you ensure that is not compromised?
I can't say that I have the perfect response to this question. It's something that I want to carry back and think about a little more deeply.
Okay.
But
Okay. So we can leave it there. Yeah.
But in recent times, we've come across this phenomena in a very different way in working with kids in the context of the COVID pandemic. If you think that will interest you and the audience, I can talk about that a bit. Please. Because in a way, that's the new normal.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, when the pandemic struck, all work in schools had to be suspended. Now, of course, we were sorry, but the kids were sorry, right? Because they wanted more of it. What did we do? We said, one, we have to innovate with online methods, but B, we have to innovate with content which we were not prepared for earlier. No, nothing in history has prepared us for this new context, therefore new content. So my colleagues, the team that you referred to, they put together a very interesting set of online exercises to be done by people. In one instance, it was kids meeting as a group physically because they stayed in a hostel. But in the second and third rounds, it was kids in their different spaces. All right? What they did, what the entire exercise did, rather successfully. It's the first time we did it, so we know that it's capable of a lot more improvement, was to process their COVID experiences. What does it mean in home relationships? What does it mean in changes in roles of family members? What does it mean in my relationship with the neighborhood, the grocer, the policeman? So it was a very carefully, designed set of exercises, but for the first time, we were doing something virtually. Now, it led to another stage. The group put together a marvelous play. They wrote a script called The COVID Deal. Creativity at its best. The COVID deal is the appearance on this planet from somewhere in the galaxy of the COVID monster, who is deliriously happy that he has been able to inflict this on humanity. But he's willing to make a deal with the government. All right?
Okay.
Terrific imagination, and all the social dynamics come into that. And it has come out of the kids' processes up here.
Okay.
This is,
Yeah. Okay. So I'll ask you.
By the way, readership is most welcome to get in touch with my team. You can give them our contact. They'll be only too happy to share their experiences of these new experiments in these new times. And it'll be wonderful if more people would like to join us in some of these explorations.
Okay, so I have 3 more sets of questions. And if you are brief, we can take all of those. So one is from Shubhalakshmi Dalvi. She's asking about the issue of language, that regional languages and multiple languages, and how do you address that when you are working with children. And a linked question was from Sridhar, who is talking about, say, for example, Yakshagana as a theater that has engaged with the local community to educate them about deforestation, migration, democracy. So can such folk forms be leveraged for TIE in rural India? So one is about language, one is about other forms and the potential.
I'll gladly take up the language question. I prefer not to get into the folk form because that's a huge separate challenge in itself.
Okay.
Because the theater, in its most vibrant forms, are in the folk forms, and they're facing extinction. So it has to be addressed on a different platform. Language, we begin with the acceptance of our role. We are not education policy makers. We can't even call ourselves educationists. We are essentially knowledge workers bringing in methodology to enrich education. All right?
Yeah.
And therefore, we must have a good appreciation of what education is all about, what education theories are, and so on. But we are not the educators. We are the people who are available to help the enrichment. Now, as knowledge workers, we necessarily work in the English language. But from day one, we knew that if our work at TIE is to be made relevant, we have to think of dissemination through the regional languages. So we're at that stage now. We've got a handbook that has been praised. It's been lauded. But that handbook is nothing in the English language. The very first job in dissemination is translation. And teacher training and translation have to go together in the regional languages.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're completely aware of this.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could take that forward, but I'll stop here, and because I want to accommodate more questions. So one is on policy from Sukumar Rangachari. He knows you. He has been your student and Poornima's classmate, and he is talking of your methodologies aligning with the new education policy. If you have a comment, and I will actually bring in one more, and then I will ask Lakshmi Krishnamurthy to speak because she wants to speak. So Krishna Kumar has a comment and a question. He's saying, delighted to listen to you. I'm intrigued that your talk is more about educational ideals rather than ideas. Isn't that more challenging? For instance, it might be easy to convey the idea of sustainability through the theater, but how would you communicate the ideal of sustainable development?
We've actually encountered, I'm taking the sustainability question. We've encountered this more than once in our work. And it's a dilemma which we have encountered more than once. And I have to tell you, it's also an ethical dilemma. We, very early in the project, sitting as a group to brainstorm strategy and policy and how we go about it, we asked ourselves, who are we to teach children sustainability and to take this question to its next level? Who are we to teach sustainability when it is our generation which has mucked up the planet in the first place? How dare we teach sustainability? How do we handle this situation where The guys who have damaged the planet are teaching sustainability. It's not an easy question to resolve.
No, but
But
in that case, let me add.
We have to confront this if you're going in there.
No, but in that case, aren't you then stopping yourself from communicating the ideal because of this dilemma and communicating the idea?
I know. But what I'm trying to say is that it's very difficult to separate the two things.
Okay.
In actual work. There's another side to this. The child lives and functions in one environment called the home, moves for a few hours to another environment called the classroom. In the classroom, the child is shown the wonderful, idealistic world of sustainability. Goes back home and lives the life of non-sustainability with the family. Is it possible that we are actually precipitating a value conflict in the child? We are responsible for a conflict situation in the child.
But let me ask this, that isn't that important to create a conflict situation? Because then only you start questioning.
Of course it's important. Out of conflict comes resolution. We know all that. But are we equipped to handle that conflict?
Sure.
A therapist is equipped to handle that conflict. A therapist is trained to first surface that conflict. Is the educator equipped with methodology to handle conflict? Or are you going to just, paper it over and put it aside? I heard you taking the name of Lakshmi Krishnamurti. She's present, I believe. Now, she has a most wonderful story about exactly the same kind of conflict when you're working with women's empowerment.
Yeah. So in fact,
it led to a terrific play.
Yeah. So Lakshmi wants to speak. So Lakshmi, please unmute yourself and say what you wanted to say.
Okay. No,
Yeah, Lakshmi.
I wanted to share one short experience. We worked in schools in Delhi and with teacher training. Now, when we worked with the teachers, they had immense problems because it takes longer to use theatre with some particular subject, history, whatever, than if you ratify it. Okay, so for them it meant more time, which meant working at home, coming earlier to school, and cooking at home, coming back, going back early so they could cook, etc. So then we devised a new thing, or we tried something else, not that it worked perfectly, but how to address the teachers' problems. When they got involved in their own problems, then they began to realize or began to think about or feel that theatre did do something to them. It made them think about their own problems. I think it's so important to scratch the soul, because unless you're agitated about yourself, how do you grow? How do you change? You can't change with cognitive stuff. You have to change with the soul and the heart and the gut. So that became important. Not that we succeeded with those teachers, because they had no time. They had no time for all this. How was your experience, Vijay? Was it any different?
Lakshmi was not audible.
Oh, okay.
So
I can.
You have to give me the gist.
I'll give briefly. So she was asking about her own experiences of working with teachers in Delhi and different subjects, using theatre to teach different subjects, for example, history and others. And she was saying that it takes much more time in terms of preparation conceptualization, preparation, and actual teaching. And teachers initially were facing a big problem, especially because they are women teachers. They also have a lot of home responsibilities, and then they try to engage with their own lives, what they are dealing with, and then that opened up the path, and the teachers became much more engaged and open towards it. And what is your experience in this regard?
Okay, I think I got the sense of it. So Lakshmi, it's more of a comment than a question, and I can relate to what you said quite well. About an answer, I will hold that back for the time being. I don't think I have a ready response if I look at it as a question, but as a comment, I mean, I relate to it fully. I will not force myself to give you an answer to the question, but yes, I appreciate what you said.
Okay, so we will leave it at that, Lakshmi. And I think we will end. There was one question from Sukhpal Singh, and that was linked to your last slide. That's why I am asking also this as the last question, which is the challenges stated at the end: dissemination, scaling up, and advocacy are not very unique to TIE, and there is any innovation or intervention, can we prioritize one of them? For example, if there is advocacy and or dissemination, scaling up would happen automatically.
We've thought about this on and off. To be honest, we haven't arrived at a completely satisfactory position for ourselves. Should we, because we love the methodology, because we are wedded to the methodology, should we keep adapting TIE to different curriculum subjects? Or is it time now for TIE to be brought into the classroom to address non-curriculum issues, which are important, significant today? Should we use theater, for instance, in a very different way of looking at social sciences, about society? Let me give you an example. Years ago, I was working in a school, and I'm now talking about middle school kids who, as part of an unstructured discussion, hit upon an extremely, I thought, an exciting idea, which was something like this. They felt that throughout history, I mean, they've not studied all of history of all cultures and all lands and all societies, but whatever sweep of history that they had seen in their textbooks, they felt one central cause of wars and conflicts was an act of betrayal. And betrayal, they hit upon as a central idea, as a problem of mankind.
Won't take 10 minutes.
You know?
Okay.
So now this is unplanned. But we kept thinking this is a non-curriculum subject. Should we encourage it or should we not encourage it? But although, as I said, we don't have a satisfactory answer yet, I see tremendous potential in the theater making more well-rounded kids and more well-rounded personalities by tackling non-curriculum subject ideas.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. So we will end with this last one, which is how do you see Poornima? We are doing this whole conversation in her memory. If she were here today, associating herself with this initiative, both philosophically and practically?
Well, my contact with Poornima ended just when she was blossoming fully. Right. I knew her at an age when she loved acting, she loved to be on stage. I know she was a student and a serious student now and then. But when she became a development professional, my contact was much less.
Okay.
Was much less. So I have to be honest in saying that I can't very easily visualize the later Poornima. Is difficult. So I knew an earlier Poornima.
Okay.
And that's my honest reply.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of her in her daughter, for instance. Daughters, both the daughters. And I sometimes wonder, if I could, they were very close to me. Both the daughters were very close to me. I was very close to them. I sometimes wonder how it would be if I continued that relationship with the two daughters.
Okay, so with that I will end, and I don't think we have covered almost all the questions that came in some form or the other, and we have actually gone beyond our time, and I think we have made up for the time that we lost. And so
Thanks very much. I should be thanking you. I didn't know what to expect. So I really enjoyed myself interacting.
Yeah, and I really thank you. And this kind of discourse is not to look for answers. This kind of discourse is to basically it should lead you to think and rethink and revisit your own experiences and should force you to explore more. And I think that definitely we have succeeded in doing that. So it was really wonderful. And so on my behalf and on the behalf of CBPS, we really thank you for this. And I would like to ask if Professor Vyasulu, Shivangi, do you want to add anything from your side? You're mute. You're on mute.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Just want to say that definitely I agree with what Vijay Mama is saying. I'm game. Let's pick it up from there and see where we can take it.
Yeah, thanks, Shivangi. So thank you all. Thank you all. Thanks, Usha, for coming and speaking and adding to this whole conversation. And thank you all for participating and asking extremely important questions and making the whole conversation much more engaging and deep. So once again, thank you, Professor Padaki, and we will close this webinar. Yeah, thank you.
I had a lot more to say. Can you hear me?
Not very clearly. I think there might be a mic issue or something.
I wanted to discuss a lot with him, but a lot where I differ. A lot. But there was no time. Maybe I'll ring him up and talk.
I will fight.